Welcome to This Week from the Principal's Desk, a podcast about Lutheran schools and their leadership. This podcast is hosted by two Lutheran school principals. My name is Rob Lunak, and my co-host is Mike Sheeman.
My name is Mike Sheeman. I'm principal at Bethany Lutheran School in Parma, and today we have a guest joining us for our podcast, Jim Scriven. Welcome to the podcast. Jim, if you want to introduce yourself and tell about the role you serve in, that'd be great.
Hi, Mike, Rob. Good to be here. I am Jim Scriven. I serve as the executive director for school ministry out in the Northwest District Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which means I travel a lot. I am supporting 100 different Lutheran educational ministries across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. What that really does for me as well, though, is while I'm supporting all of these schools and their leaders, I'm also learning from all of them all the time. And then it's my pleasure to share what I'm learning, trying to help everybody do what they do the best that they can. And apparently, maybe I get a little chance to do that today here to your audience.
Absolutely. And actually, I was blessed to be able to serve with you for many years when I was out in the Northwest District. And Jim's always been a great support for Lutheran schools and Lutheran educators. And one of the things that we talked a lot about in the Northwest District at the time, we talked about proficiency-based learning, proficiency-based education. And on a previous podcast episode, that kind of came up, and Rob and I briefly discussed it and then skirted over it, but we thought that really in and of itself deserves an episode devoted to exactly this topic. Now, the crux of proficiency-based learning is really meeting the needs of every single child. And we have so many models of how that works, but typically in my ministries anyways, the parents think, when I was growing up, this is what school looked like. We were in desks and rows and it was good enough for me, so it's good enough for my children. And my thought was always, it prepared you for the world that you face today. Is this the world that your children are going to face when they head out into a career path? And as I was an administrator in Oregon, I was able to explore proficiency-based learning with Jim and even take steps to implement some of this at the school where I served. So, Jim, do you mind maybe starting us off to say at a very basic level, what is proficiency-based learning, even all the names it goes by, because there's a whole alphabet soup associated with it?
Sure, happy to. I have to admit, I have a frustration about proficiency-based learning, and that is that I came upon it after I was no longer a building principal. I would so have taken my staff and dived into this because it makes so much sense. At the surface level of education, we all talk about we meet students where they're at, and we're trying to help them grow. But teachers are handicapped in that because we take students where they're at and try to force them into the same one-size-fits-all mold. That's traditional learning. We all have the same scope and sequence. We all have the same standards that need to be met by the end of the year. And we all have pretty much the same assessment measures and targets that each student has to hit because they happen to be 10 years old, 12 years old, whatever age they're at, and we move them through. Oh, we've had exceptions. We sometimes have retained a child for a second year with that mark of shame, and that we tell the parents, it's not really, this is just supporting them where they're at. But everybody knew he failed. That was the wrong model. And you're right. Parents, they say, well, it worked when I was in school. No, it didn't. They all know they have friends who flunked out, quit high school by 15, 16, were out behind the building smoking pot because they didn't care about school anymore. That's not what we want for our kids. Proficiency-based learning says, throw out the walls, throw out the barriers, and throw out the factory model. And instead, just hold on to the fact that all students are going to be in school and learn certain concepts and skills, but in the ways that work for them. They don't all have to learn it at the same pace. They don't have to learn it in the same way. We're just going to figure out what we can provide, what learning experiences we can facilitate. I said that word intentionally, not teach, facilitate instruction and learning so that they all achieve their goals eventually. Why do they all have to graduate high school at 18? Now I'm going really long form on this, but If a student has the capability to finish up all of their math curriculum by 14, but takes more time for English language arts instruction, great. They can do more time on that, and maybe they'll finish that by 18. Or maybe they finish everything by 16 and they move on to college. Our instruction model ought to allow for that. And it really doesn't right now. So proficiency-based learning, let the students control the pacing, let them have agency over the way they approach the concepts, the standards that we're achieving, and let them thrive by demonstrating mastery in ways that work for them.
Listening to you describe that, I don't think there's anyone out there, any principal who's going to go, well, I don't want my kids to strive and succeed. No one's going to say those things. But we look at the minutia, we get in the weeds, and people go, oh, well, that's going to be a lot of work on teachers. We've never done it this way. But I think throwing out those walls, as you said, so the average Lutheran school is 70 kids or fewer in size, where we have a lot of small Lutheran schools who, if they're doing it the factory model way, are not going to be able to do it to the level of a school with more resources, more teachers, more classes, right? So this sounds like almost a perfect thing if you're one of those smaller schools to differentiate right off the bat and say, hey, we can do this because of our size that we can't do if we had 400 kids. So why don't we look at that? What do you say to a principal at that school who has 70 or 80 kids, who's doing things the traditional way? What's your elevator pitch for them to be like, hey, you really should change this right now?
Rob, you just nailed that so well. When we have that small staff and they're struggling to deliver the traditional model, it means you've got kindergarten, you've got first and second grade squeezed together, you got third and fourth grade squeezed together, and we're convincing parents these combined classrooms, no, they work, it's good for the kids. But we all know the teacher cannot give the full first grade curriculum to all the first graders and the full second grade curriculum. They're doing things different. They're having to combine some things. They're having to blend some things. And they're trying to still say it's first and second grade. You can tell a school instead, hey, stop worrying about that, about all of the different levels, and just have your whole team all work with groups of students and supporting them where they're at and letting them move through your curriculum smoothly as they demonstrate mastery of the different concepts. A school that really goes all in like that could have half of the teachers, you said, maybe there's 7 or 8 teachers, half the teachers teaching the lower grades and half the teachers teaching the upper grades. And you've got one that's more the math specialist, one that's the reading specialist, one that's the social studies, science specialist, break them up however you want. But all these teachers could support all of these children working through their own lessons. And that's not everybody's in a silo. They're working in projects. They're doing group activities, and they're helping each other. One of the things all of our educators these days in the traditional model get hung up with is cheating. And, how can someone help somebody without helping too much? If you adopt proficiency-based learning, cheating doesn't exist anymore because you don't care about the homework other than whatever work they're doing is a vehicle for each individual to master the concepts and skills. And each one on their own will demonstrate their mastery. So if little Billy had Susie practically hold his hand through all of the activities, but in the end, Billy understands, so what? And good job, Susie. You helped someone else in their journey of education. Don't we want to create communities of learners? And in Lutheran schools, tie that into the fact we want them all to care for each other as brothers and sisters in Christ and bring them all along. It so well fits our philosophy of faith and education.
Now, Jim, I'm going to jump on a word that you've used twice in what you just shared. Your word was mastery. I know this was something we struggled with at the school where I was serving. And I'm going to pitch it to you. How would you define mastery? Is it 100% that a student has full understanding? How do you know when they've mastered something and are ready to move on?
That's something every school, every faculty does have to take some time determining what does mastery look like. I think there is two different levels the school would have to consider there. Mastery is, what's the base level of competency at these concepts and skills we need versus what's advanced. Not everybody needs to achieve advanced. Mastery then is demonstrating sufficient grasp, and I mean true grasp, not, well, they can get 80% of it right. They should be able to 100% demonstrate they've got the core concepts and skills that are needed for what you're going to now build on top of it. There's a fantastic YouTube video. I think I shared this with you back in the day, Mike, by Sal Khan Academy, where he talks about this model in brief of if we did school, or we're doing school in such a weird way that if you applied it to other industries, it would never work and it would be so illogical. And he applies it to building a house. And if you built the foundation and the inspectors come in and they go, well, that spot over there didn't quite set, and this is a little off kilter, we'll give you maybe an 85% on this, but that passes, it's good enough, continue. And then you build the first story and inspectors come in, same issue, you get a 75 this time, but that's still good enough, continue. And by the time you build your second story, the building collapses because what it's built upon wasn't sufficient. It wasn't solid. It had gaps. And that's how we do school all the time. So a school would need to figure out what do we have to master? What are the things that honestly every child needs to know before we can let them go further? Tell me if you've heard this before. A teacher is telling a parent in a parent-teacher conference, yeah, you're right. Sally struggled with the math at this level, but it's going to come around again next year in another form, and she'll have a chance to get it then.
Oh, yeah.
So we let a child move on without grasping what they needed. And why did we move them on like that? Because there was only so much time. We have to move everybody along in this factory model. But so much richer if we let Sally have more time. And she might have been able to spend more time on that math if we didn't force her to spend so much time on reading and writing, where she was a whiz. She was just whipping along, but no, can't. You still have to spend that whole 50-minute block every day. Doesn't matter. You didn't need it. We all do it.
I think if I could paraphrase for a minute, I think what I'm kind of hearing is we all know as teachers that differentiation is best practice. And so many schools have kind of split the baby and they said, well, we're going to differentiate, but we're not going to do it entirely until we're actually doubling our work in a sense, because differentiation is hard. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, and correct me if I'm not, the way most of our schools are doing differentiation is actually more work for less results than if we were just do proficiency-based whole hog.
Amen. You nailed it. Yeah. You could say at its root, proficiency-based learning is differentiation to the max. We are differentiating for every single student and allowing them to thrive. Now, again, a teacher hears that and then goes, seriously? You want me to personalize the instructional program for all 25 of my students year after year after year? Okay, that sounds a little difficult. To move into this model, yes, it does take some initial work to wrap your mind around this and set up the way you're going to learn and the way you're going to facilitate learning in your classroom. But it's not quite as hard as all that. You're still working with the base materials. It's just you're allowing students to move at their own pace, and you're also letting go of some of the control. So especially as you move higher in the grades, the students will do some of this work for you. You don't have to come up with every learning activity. You can say, what are your passions? What do you want to study? And they'll grasp some concept in history or in science, and you'll say, okay, do a project on that. Here's some concepts that I'm going to have you focus on while you do it. Yeah, it's still going to be some work to get an understanding of how to do this at first. But once you've got a year or two into it, a teacher would never go back. And we do have schools where teachers have fully embraced this model now, and they would never go back because they see students so excited and the learning being real, and they're no longer having to have cattle prods to move the class along. They're gone. Woo, we've unleashed them, and they're really learning.
I still remember vividly the first time you and I, Jim, had a conversation about this. And as an administrator, frankly, it scared me and I was not on board. I'm like,
I
oh,
remember
this
that.
is not, yep. and and I thought, especially, I'm thinking about the teachers because I had two thoughts. Was one, I don't know how in the world I would ever convince my teachers to invest the time into shifting a full educational model, full paradigm at the school. And then on top of it, this is not what's being taught to teachers who are new teachers. There's no PBL class in university that's part of the teacher training process. So I'm starting a process that none of my teachers have background or experience in. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got from you was learn about it. Like, start reading about it. You shared those videos you mentioned with me. And then I understood and I fully agreed with it conceptually. But as an administrator, I struggled to figure how on earth am I going to do this practically in the school. And Jim, do you have any kind of advice for people listening, or what are some practical steps that they could take to have their whole school community learn about this and start thinking about implementation?
I do. There's some simple guidance I give on this. First, it does, as I did with you, you got to start with the leader of the school. So the leader has to understand this, have a passion for it, and want to then infect everyone else. So the principal should never dive into this without fully having studied the concepts themselves. Once the principal has it, then you got to give the teachers the chance to have that same learning journey. You would never introduce this at end of year faculty meetings and saying, hey, next year, we're going to try this now. Bad call, because the first response for most of them will be to dig their heels in, to resist. I already worked too hard and you want me to do that? That's a disaster. So I would say you're spending a whole school year studying this, giving the teachers a chance to read materials individually and together, discuss these concepts, give them some videos to see, and best case scenario, find a school that's already doing it well. They're all over the country, more and more. There's whole public school districts doing this, but there are a lot of private schools that have implemented this in a variety of ways now, Lutheran schools included. Go on a field trip. Let them see it in action. Let them ask questions. You spend that year, and if your teachers are, if they're quality teachers, they're going to get it. They're going to figure out, okay, I see what's happening, and I would like to know how we might do it. Most of them still aren't going to be going, yeah, let's do this, because it's still scary. But once they're tantalized and they see what could be, now you all can journey together on how that could be, will be here. How do we make it happen? Because just like for students, even doing it in a school, PBL is not one size fits all. You got to look at your school, the community you serve, the skills of the teachers you have, and create a method that will work for you. But you've done all that, okay? You communicated with the teachers. Don't forget, you also do have to communicate and educate your parents. The students will go with it. Your older students, if you shift to PBL, they will initially resist it because not the struggling students. They'll be like, oh, cool, this is neat. It'll be your A students, your honor roll students in the upper grades will push back big time because they've learned to work the traditional model. They're coasting. They don't even have to try much anymore. Why would you mess that up for them? In PBL, they'll actually have to own their learning, not just, figure out what they need for the test and get the A and then video game at home the rest of the time. They're going to be really working on things that are genuine and authentic. And well, we've made them lazy. That's our fault. So any pushback they give us, we have to just work through. But we're not making this change for them as much as for those we've been failing. The advanced students, they'll figure it out. They'll adapt over time. But the other students, oh my goodness, we will have such changed the experience. And this education, this way you're educating both your teachers and your parent community. It's so important for them to finally recognize that as schools, we are failing right now. That's why they don't want to change. What's wrong with the current model? They're telling themselves. It's worked for decades. we're doing fine. But this confronts them with the fact that every year we are failing some of our kids who can't perform. And it's not just because they don't care. It's because they couldn't meet those standards year after year and they've turned off. They've shut down. They don't think they have what it takes to succeed in education. We've got to change that instead of saying, well, that's just what happens with some kids. We have a crisis in this country with not enough teachers. Why? Okay, we don't pay them well enough. That's true. But nobody really is a teacher for the pay. That's never been the case. Yet we used to have gobs of teachers. What's changed? Teaching is not the joy it should be, because even though we pretend it's not there, we see year after year all these kids were failing and all the discipline problems that come at us because they are unhappy in school. And you shift the model, the discipline issues go way down too. The joy comes back. People will keep teaching in this sort of model. So you get the teachers through the study to see this, and you get the parents to see your kids are going to actually want to like school again. That's when everybody will allow the school to move forward.
Well, you've convinced me. I think you've convinced Mike, although I don't think it's going to be on the Bethany end of the year staff meeting. Probably not. But
maybe a teaser. Maybe Come on.
Teaser. There you go, Mike. Come on, you can do it.
There you go. Yeah.
Now, what do you say to someone they're in the same boat as me? They're definitely ready for this. What is the very next thing they could do to make sure this isn't just some great idea that they file away and dream about as they're thinking about, they're still doing the traditional model? What's the next step somebody could take?
Think about the teachers on your staff. Who are the ones that are a little more innovative, a little more open to trying new things, and bring them into your inner circle of what you've been discovering, and go have a beer. We are doing this on May 5th, so it would be a margarita today, but go and just talk it through, share your excitement for this, get them to want to know more. Don't make this about, hey, I want you to try something. Let them be the one, because if you talk about this and they hear this excitement, you show them a couple videos and you're like, you're so jazzed about what you've learned. The right kind of teacher, maybe it's 1, 2, maybe there's 3 teachers on staff who are like, oh, wow, wait, this is cool. And one of them is going to say to you, could I try this in my classroom? I mean, do I have to wait for everybody to want to do this? Could I try some of this? And you say, absolutely. And you are their protection to just experiment. Maybe they say, I think I could see how I could do this with math in my 5th grade classroom. You're like, wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, play around with it. Show me what your ideas are, and just support them. This is how you will start to shift opinion and get it introduced very easily. You've got some early adopters experimenting with it. Now, I know a school that did it this way. They started shifting math at only 1 grade level. And then the next year's teacher, Mike is there. The next year's teacher is dealing with people coming into her math classroom where, well, I do it the traditional way. And the students want what they had last year. And the parents want their kids to feel about math the way they did last year. And it will start to cause a very natural pressure, good, positive peer pressure, I'd say, to explore what we're doing and maybe consider changing it. Because look how it's working in that room. And then everybody wants to know a little more, start educating all your staff. So that's a way you could kind of just start to jump into it, find who your advocates are and let them experiment.
And I think, Jim, we've talked a lot too about what makes you unique as a Lutheran school. And we know first and foremost is that we are all about Jesus, period, full stop. There are other things that we can do that show how we truly meet the needs of our students. And I think PBL is a really great way to do that, to be able to say, we look at the needs of each individual learner. I think a lot of schools have that as a buzz phrase. Well, how do you meet the needs of each learner? Well, we have tutors on staff. Well, yeah, but my kid doesn't need a tutor. My kid is your typical average 4th grader. And how are you meeting their needs? And so it's another way that we can identify ourselves as unique within a community and really model. And the ministry that we're called to do of meeting kids where they are and seeing them grow. The other thing, and I'm gonna jump back to something you said earlier, about teaching the curriculum and the standards and so forth, having the kids move through. You talked about Jimmy and Susie or whomever that were cheating, if you will. The other thing that this really does, and this is speaking a little bit from experience, it teaches an unwritten curriculum to the kids of how do you face challenges, how do you resource yourself to be able to get used to solving problems, really. And so when you come up against something, it's not a full stop. I don't get it. I don't know how to do this. How many times we've heard, I don't get it. It's a matter of, here are some tools that you can have, and it really starts to instill that problem solving attitude and mentality in the minds of kids. Jim, would you mind talking briefly about some of the specific resources that are out there? And I'm going to name one that I've seen some of the schools in Lutheran circles use, called Summit. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the ways that people could dive into things that exist, as maybe not to just take it and apply it in their own school, but to use that as part of their learning journey about PBL.
Yeah, there are resources, there are programs you can adopt that are built on a foundation of proficiency or competency-based learning, where students have the ability to move forward at their own pacing. It's things that try to make it so a teacher doesn't have to create these things from scratch. I'll put a caveat here that any of these programs that exist also are a crutch that limit what you could do. So the Summit Learning Platform is one of those that exists out there. It's designed for students starting at 4th grade, potentially all the way up through 12th grade. It's really not for primary levels, but it creates a computer system that you're having your students use. The computer is not primarily teaching the kids. It's still, students have a playlist that they're working through of different lessons and activities, and then assessments that they do through the platform to demonstrate their mastery, and then they can move on. And there is a target, a pacing that they should be striving towards, but it's understood some are going to be a little behind on that, some are going to be a little farther ahead, and that's encouraged. Teachers in this platform are able to watch through the tool how their students are doing, where they're having weaknesses or struggles, so that the teacher can go do some one-on-one intervention and help them work through the pieces they're clearly missing. But for those who don't need much teacher assistance, they're going to just be able to plow forward through this platform. The Summit Learning Platform is not intended to be the full curriculum a school uses. They're supposed to be supplementing with other real-world types of experiences and learning. And for a Christian school, that means bringing in also the integration of the faith into what we do. There's plenty of space for that. It's not a one platform rules them all system. But what it brings to it, and there are other tools out there that help with this too, is it's using the power of technology to help students have some agency in what they do, because there's AI involved. Okay, the assessments are really paying attention to how students are doing and then modeling what's next based on how they've already performed, not cookie cutter. And that's fantastic, because if you have a class of 20 kids, you as a teacher can't split yourself 20 ways. You only have so much time for everybody. Systems like the Summit Learning Platform say the students don't need you for everything. They can just work through their learning, and it's all laid out here. And then you're going to interject certain things throughout the curriculum, but for the most part, you're just their cheerleader. You're helping them, you're facilitating what they need, and you're giving them pats on the back. Good job, guys, keep it up. But they don't need you to be the sole distributor of all wisdom and knowledge. They can find it on their own. Summit gives a structure to that. You had mentioned others. Yeah, there are others. I did mention earlier, Khan Academy is another tool that's out there. Khan is free. Khan Academy is free to use. The Summit Learning Platform is also not something that there's an expense to. You get to use it because it's subsidized through grants, through private organizations. Your payment is your data. They get to collect data on your students. They're not tracking. It's not Big Brother. It's just they're shaping what the tool can become by the data of the students who use it and how it goes. So you have to be willing to let them have your data. I have no problem with that. I use Google all the time. Yeah, track where I went and go. Then my ads will be smarter for me. Whatever. Yeah, nothing is free, but some things don't cost me too much.
Yeah. So Rob, I'm curious, what do you think? You're about to jump on starting micro schools in Milwaukee. What do you think?
It's been one of those things that ever since I started teaching, it's been really interesting to me because I've been at some small schools, I've been at some bigger schools, and I've seen that what we are doing, it's those words I always hate. Well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, I don't know if I like the way we've always done it. When 100 years ago, if somebody had a heart attack, they just died. That doesn't mean that's the way we have to keep doing it, right? Just because it's the way we've always done it. So I'm really interested and curious about this idea. And there's another podcast episode in here somewhere about what's this going to look like in 15 years, because ChatGPT has been nuts. Mike, I think I showed you, I had ChatGPT write like a sample expulsion letter, and it was better than what I would have come up with because it just has such a huge data set. And so there are so many opportunities about how this could change in the next, I say 10 years, but I think it's going to be much, much, much faster than that based on what we already have. I asked ChatGPT to write a sample pastor's sermon and then a sample church constitution. I'm on the constitutional committee in our district, and it came up with a church constitution better than some of the ones we get sent to us, with fewer errors and all the things we want listed. And so if that's what we have out there already, imagine what that can do when it comes to helping somebody learn the things they're interested in. So there's a lot of things I'm definitely going to take. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we have 40 hours to do on this podcast. I think we probably have to wrap this up sometime today. So Jim, if people are still interested in this, is there anything on your district's website that they'd be able to find, or anything else I can point them towards that we can drop in the show notes? And then Mike, after he gives us those resources, you want to close us in prayer here?
For sure.
That's a great thing to ask. I don't have anything specific that's easy to find now, but I have a whole bunch of personal resources that I'm happy to share with anybody. So if anyone does want to talk more about this, I've collected a lot of things over the years. They're welcome to reach out. I do have an email. So Jim S. at nowlcms.org. And I can point you to some schools that already do this, and I can send you a collection of videos and resources if you want to explore this some more. Absolutely, because I would encourage this. Mike had mentioned, we need our niche. This could be why people would come to you. But you're right, education is shifting, and imagine if everyone around you has shifted, and you're the Lutheran school that says, well, we just do it the way we always did. That school won't last much longer. And what we do in Lutheran ministry is too important to fade away. So please, if anyone wants to talk more, reach out to me.
Jim, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I feel like, Rob and I have done a lot of podcasts just to kind of dip toes into certain areas and expose people to that. I'm going to encourage people, as somebody with experience here who dipped his toe, I realized I should have maybe done a cannonball into the pool rather than just a toe dipping. So this is one that I would really encourage administrators to dive into much deeper than some of the other stuff. This is real, this is meaningful, and this is right in line with our mission of who we are. So why don't we end by going to the Lord in prayer? Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity that you've given to us this day, just to talk a little bit about education in the future. God, we know that our future is secure with you. We know that because of Jesus and all that he's done, our future is secure in heaven. Yet we live in a world that we see changing around us every single day. The needs change, the resources change, the people change. We thank you that you never do, but we ask that you would equip us to be able to face those challenges and those changes so that we might continue to be your outposts as Lutheran schools in the communities where we serve. I pray that you would bless all who hear this podcast, that you would allow them to research this a little bit further, to learn more, and to know that this pairs perfectly with the mission that we have to share your love with kids and their families. Bless us, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.